Hi, my name's Lance, and I'm the owner of Permanent Records and the Permanent Records Roadhouse here in Los Angeles. And I'm here to tell you, as a record store owner, a person who's been involved in this community for over 20 years and has owned his own record store for 17 plus years, that you do not have to spend a lot of money or a lot of time to enjoy some of the great things about vinyl records. I know these days, especially, it can seem really expensive, really overwhelming, and just really intense getting into this community or this hobby. And it doesn't have to be that way. I started collecting records back in the 90s when you could go to thrift stores and garage sales and estate sales and get classics for next to nothing. I consider myself really lucky to have been able to come up at that time, but I didn't know that those records I was buying for $1 back in the day were going to become valuable, or that I was even going to start my own record store when I was 24. I'm 41 now, by the way, about to turn 42. And I did it for the love of it. There's just something always that has always felt really appealing about vinyl to me. I don't know what it is or what it was initially. I know what it is now, but I was always drawn towards it. And the added side benefit of buying records back in the day was that they were cheaper than any other format, and streaming and downloads and digital music platforms were not available to me. So you had to have a physical copy of whatever record you wanted to listen to, right? So I got into records primarily because they were the least expensive format at a time when I didn't have any money, and all I had was time to go to places to dig for records, wherever that was. Maybe it was at thrift stores, occasionally at garage sales and estate sales and things like that. But anyway, even though we're in the middle, presumably, of the vinyl renaissance, it doesn't have to be an expensive hobby. Yes, it can very well be a very expensive hobby, and I have developed into a very serious record collector that spends way too much money on records, especially if you ask the average Joe out there. I spend way too much money on records, but I don't spend as much as the person that spends the most money on records, and I also don't shy away from spending a fair amount of money on good things. But I am here today to tell you and reassure you that you can get into this hobby for very little money and have a lot of fun with it without having to break the bank. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. First of all, you're gonna have to have a turntable, right? And there are, luckily, a lot of really great options for beginner turntables these days. Like I said, we live in the vinyl renaissance, and new turntables are being made all day, every day, and you can get them at big box chains. I wouldn't necessarily recommend running out and buying the cheapest turntable that you can possibly get your hands on, but you can get a solid workhorse turntable for about $150 brand new, and you could probably find a used one from somebody who tried to get into the hobby and wants out of it on OfferUp or Craigslist or eBay for less than that, or even Amazon. Or at your local record store. A lot of local record stores, a lot of used record stores carry secondhand turntables as well. So you can get into it that way. And what I always recommend for people who don't want to spend a lot of time or dedicate a lot of space in their home to a record collection is getting one of the newfangled turntables that have a Bluetooth have Bluetooth compatibility. And then all you need is that turntable and a Bluetooth speaker, and you can enjoy the best parts of listening to vinyl records. Of course, an audiophile setup is ideal. I have heard clean records, original pressings, in the best possible condition on the best possible stereo setup, and it is a what is the word for it? It's a mind-blowing experience. It's absolutely wonderful to hear a super clean original pressing on a high-end turntable or stereo system. But that said, there are a lot of records out there that weren't even recorded to on high-end equipment to be listened to on high-end stereo equipment. I really enjoy the world of private press records, and those records were recorded on a budget by people in a DIY, independent kind of way. And no matter how good the turntable is that you have, that record isn't going to sound any better than it was recorded, right? So there's that element. And there are also limitations to, you know, what everyone has to spend on records and or stereo equipment. And if you want to listen to records because of fidelity and audio quality, that's great. Kudos, more power to you. I'm all for that. I think that is one of the major benefits of the vinyl format. Of course, the fidelity is an important element, but you can also buy pretty beat up looking records for a fraction of the price of a mint copy, and a lot of them, and trust me, I've listened front to back to a lot, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of records at this point that look really, really bad and play fairly well on an average turntable. So that is one of the great things about the format, is that it's really resilient. And of course, there are good looking records that sound terrible, but a lot of times really rough looking vinyl can produce a pretty good sound, especially well produced albums like the albums on Blue Note if you get into jazz, or just major label records that were mastered and cut by really, really knowledgeable and experienced engineers. So there's that. And then the other thing about getting super, super deep into an audiophile system is that not only do you have to invest a lot of money in your stereo, at some point when your stereo system becomes so high end, you have to replace all of the records in your collection that aren't perfect. And that's a whole ball of wax in and of itself. And I, for one, do not want to have to replace the records on my shelf. I like Technics 1200s DJ turntables because I have a lot of fun going back and forth. I DJ regularly. I like to make mixes on my turntables, and that's just how I get down. Those particular turntables are not cheap, but you can get turntables that are comparable to Technics 1200s for not a lot of money these days, which is pretty cool. And I think adding a mixer and even maybe a sampler to your DJ rig makes the experience of collecting and playing your vinyl records that much more fun. Yeah, and also, life has surface noise, and a lot of us don't have time to just sit around and give whole albums or even multiple albums a day are undivided attention. I love records more than just about anybody else in the world, as you might imagine. And because I buy, sell, and trade albums, well, vinyl records in general, 45, 78s, etc., for a living, I am very busy and I generally just don't have time. I most days don't have time to sit down to one album all the way through at home on my stereo system. So what do I need a $10,000 turntable for that has a $3,000 cartridge on it and so on and so forth? I'm not at that point in my life. And if I, as a record store owner and a person who buys and sells vinyl records for a living, doesn't have that kind of setup, you shouldn't feel like you have to be able to enjoy the collecting records as well. And let's see, what else would I like to say about this subject? One of my favorite parts about collecting records is discovery. Finding things that you would not have found otherwise. Getting out there in the world, going to record stores, and anywhere else that you can get records, and digging through the used bins and using the listening stations in the turntables or your phone to be able to preview albums on YouTube or wherever else is kind of the most fun part of record collecting. I love the community. I love going to record stores and talking to the people behind the counter. And I love talking to people like my friends who also collect records about the things that I love or the things that I most recently found in the wild. And obviously there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of records that everyone knows and knows are wonderful and have collectability and are in high demand. But there are also millions of records, diamonds in the rough, waiting to be discovered by you, whether that is an album that sold in the millions or even billions when it was released, and the supply is just much higher than the demand. Those records are generally inexpensive, and there are a lot of them waiting to be rediscovered. And across all genres, there are psych records like that. There are jazz records like that. There are reggae records like that, electronic music, etc. All different genres. There are punk records that are underappreciated. All genres have records that exist that just are not expensive, but are really, really enjoyable records to listen to. And you can find those out there if you get out there and dig and drop the needle, get a portable turntable, and go to garage sales. Be the first one at the garage sale to be able to find the best stuff before anybody else gets there. But those records are out there waiting to be discovered. One particular example from my collection that I discovered just before the pandemic, just a few years ago, is this Dynamic Drums and Keyboard album. This is a record on a label called Kimbo that primarily made educational records to teach children rhythm and how to dance and so forth. Well, this record looks very similar to all of the rest of the records on Kimbo, and yet, as you heard on the previous 3 tracks, not so much on this one that we have on in the background, this is what we are listening to now, this is a wild sounding record. I'm sure I got this for $1 at a record fair or at a thrift store or something like that. And when I dropped the needle on this thing for the first time, it blew my mind. And that is what I'm talking about. I absolutely love discovering records like this that prior to me discovering it were ungoogleable. You could not find this record online. It was not on Discogs until Tara, my girlfriend, put it on Discogs to hopefully get a copy for herself, which she subsequently did. So yeah, that said, we'll keep this video on the short side. I just wanted to remind everybody that in this wild and crazy world of record collecting, that you can get into it without breaking the bank, and it can stay fun without you feeling like you have to have this record, this record, this record, and this record before you are you can consider yourself a record collector. Get into it however you can. Budget as much as you can for whatever income bracket that you might be in, whatever you're comfortable with. If it's $5 a week for records, just spend a little extra time digging and needle dropping inexpensive records. And if you catch the bug further than that, awesome. And you want to upgrade your turntable and upgrade your stereo system, amazing. There are a lot of benefits to having a really high-end stereo system and upgrading the quality of your existing records. I'm not telling anyone not to do that if they can afford to, but I do think you can have a lot of fun and you can discover some amazing music by getting into collecting vinyl. And you can offset the cost of the hobby by buying cheap records and reselling them. You can resell them online. You can resell them to record stores like ours. You can trade them in towards other things that we have in the store that you might want more than the bargain bin records that you've collected. Either way, there are plenty of options and a lot of fun waiting for you in the vinyl community. So come on in. The water's wonderful, and you will have more fun doing this than you will most hobbies. Again, my name's Lance. I'm the owner of Permanent Records, and I will see you again in the very near future, my friends. Happy hunting.